Welcome to the Right to Reason podcast. I am your host, Robert Stanley. The term liberty, equality, fraternity is a motto that originates from the French Revolution, a period of far-reaching social and political upheaval in France that started in 1789. We will be focusing on the initial two-thirds of that motto. Ask yourself this question: what is more important, liberty or equality? Can they coexist? I'll be talking to two gentlemen about this, a libertarian and a socialist. We all know they disagree about quite a bit from these labels. Aren't you tired of labels? But what can they agree upon? I intend to find out. Let's get started.
It's the Right to Reason podcast.
This episode of the Right to Reason podcast is brought to you by our patrons and contributors like me. We have all recognized the value of the unrestrained marketplace of ideas and have decided to make a difference. You can make a difference too. Contribute at patreon.com/right and learn more about your right to reason at therighttoreason.com. Your activism is appreciated.
And today we're joined with Michael Mikulski and Philip Griffin. These are two gentlemen that I have had the opportunity to talk to. Geez, has it been years, guys? I think I've known you guys for years.
Oh, yeah.
This is
think so. Years or more.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Also, two very intelligent gentlemen, two completely different political philosophies. Most of the time on the show, the listeners have come to expect like two people that disagree about one thing but agree on everything else, right? Or maybe they disagree a little bit about something incredibly specific. But with this conversation, you guys are so far apart that I think at any moment where you find some kind of common ground, that's going to be a major success. And I think that's something you guys should feel good about if or when that occurs. Would it be crazy to characterize Michael as far right and Philip as far left? Would you guys say those terms are probably accurate?
I wouldn't call myself far right, but I'm certainly a conservative in my thinking and in my politics.
Just because like far right sounds Nazi these days, right?
Right.
But I don't mean to imply like
I'm a pretty reasonable person.
Of course,
that's why I'm appearing on the Right to Reason.
Ah, nice plug moment. Thank you. So, how about you, Phil?
Yeah.
Would you say that you're a far left, crazy nut job Antifa man?
That sounds about right, but I would say, we got to be careful when we use these terms because, of course, their meanings have been bastardized over the years and used for different ideologies, political motives. But yeah, I'll say somebody on the street would probably view my views as that guy's a lefty.
Yeah. Okay. Well, how about this? Let me rephrase it then. Would it be okay to say, Michael, you lean more libertarian, while Philip, you lean more socialist? Would that be a good characterization, maybe?
For me, yes, I definitely would agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's about right for me.
Okay, yeah. Right-left would be a really horrible dichotomy, but maybe more libertarian, more socialist. I want to throw out some definitions real quick, if that's okay. And you guys can disagree with these definitions. This is just basic Merriam-Webster definitions of these terms. And everybody knows, especially with economics and what have you, they don't really have definitions. They have usages whenever we're conversating with each other, right? Because we don't want to talk past each other. So if you guys want to redefine something throughout the conversation, please feel free. I'm just going to throw this out for the listener more or less so that they can kind of get an idea of the topics that we're discussing. Mercantilism is the belief in the benefits of profitable trading. Socialism, a political and economic theory of social organization that advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. Capitalism, an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the state. Liberty, one of the major topics of our conversation today, liberty, the state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life, behavior, or political views. And of course, equality, the argument that I believe Philip will be presenting today, the state of being equal, especially in status, rights, and opportunities. When trying to characterize the two of you, would you say that I was right there, Philip, that you're going to be arguing from a place of more equality, and then also to you, Michael, that you'll be arguing from a place of trying to promote more liberty. Is that fair?
I mean, in general, yeah, that would be fair. I would say that the biggest reason for believing what I believe is a moral reason. So that would be probably the foundation of my worldview.
Interesting. Yeah. And I would I would say, yeah, for moral reasons, I think you nailed it for me too. So that's funny.
Okay, so liberty versus equality. Michael versus Philip. Let me start off with two prominent thinkers on this topic that might kind of represent both your views. Somebody whose names that I'm sure both of you are familiar with. Somebody that the listener might hear and go, oh, yeah, I know that guy. I identify with his kind of thinking, or maybe this guy's the devil. But let's start off with Milton Friedman. He was an American economist who received the 1976 Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Science for his research on consumption analysis, monetary history, and theory, and the complexity of stabilization policy. I didn't understand all those words, but here's Milton.
In my opinion, a society that aims for equality before liberty will end up with neither equality nor liberty. And a society that aims first for liberty will not end up with equality, but it will end up with a closer approach to equality than any other kind of system that has ever been developed. Now, that conclusion is based both on evidence from history, across history, and also, I believe, on reasoning which, if you try to follow through the implications of aiming first at equality, will become clear to you. You can only aim at equality by giving some people the right to take things from others. And what ultimately happens when you aim at equality is that A and B decide what C shall do for D. Except that they take a little bit of a commission off on the way.
All right, so basically Milton there is saying you have to decide between liberty and equality, but you better pick liberty because equality, you have to take something from someone. It's almost like he's representing some kind of Ayn Rand style philosophy of saying taxation is theft, or just taking anything from someone else without their consent is unethical in a way. I want to present the other side of that argument, and that's with Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky is an American linguist, philosopher, cognitive scientist, historian, political activist, and social critic, sometimes called the father of modern linguistics. Chomsky is also a major figure in analytic philosophy and one of the founders of the field of cognitive science. That's from Chomsky.info. I kind of feel like that falls short of describing him. He's kind of like what, I don't know, Mike, you tell me, man. Like he's like the demon of the right? He's so far left that like
No, not at all.
No?
I wouldn't characterize Chomsky like that at all. I would say Chomsky's got some things right, but I think he's confused as to the causes of certain things, or maybe he misframes certain arguments.
Okay.
But I'm not like I hate Chomsky or anything. I think Chomsky has some really valid points, especially when it comes to, for example, freedom of speech or resisting some type of authority or an oppressive authority. That's, I think, certainly a universal idea.
Are you kind of an anarchist, Mike?
At this point in my life, no. In my younger days, I would call myself an anarcho-capitalist, but nice. I certainly dislike the state. Let me put it that way.
Fair enough. Where do you stand on your anarchist motivations there, Phil?
My understanding, and I haven't studied, anarcho-syndicalism, but if the definition is something like, power has to prove itself, what's the word I'm looking for, as legitimate, then yes. So power structures, the government, whatever, it has to prove itself.
That's pretty cool. That's probably something you guys could agree on right off the start.
Oh.
You just want us to agree.
I do.
That's something I'd like to go into, sure.
Okay, here's Chomsky.
How do you balance the needs of liberty and equality? Because those two impulses always seem to be in conflict. Conservatism would put sort of an extreme emphasis on individual liberty and sort of neglect equality. Liberals, you could argue, probably want a little bit of both. And radicals, whether anarchists, communists, or socialists, would, in some sense,
lean more toward equality over liberty. I'm just curious to know from you, how do you think, first off, do you think there is a tension between liberty and equality? And secondly, how do we best create a society that balances those two tensions?
The idea that there's a conflict between them is ideological dogma. We don't know that there's a conflict between them. And in fact, classical liberals didn't think there was. So take, say, Adam Smith, who we're supposed to revere but not breed. One of his core arguments for markets, he had rather nuanced arguments for markets, but one of the basic ones was that, as he said, in a free society, markets will lead to equality. And he meant equality of outcome.
Not equality of opportunity.
No, he meant equality of outcome, which he took for granted to be a desideratum.
I want you guys to notice he's saying equality of outcome, and that's a topic I'd really like to begin with whenever we start a conversation. But let me let Noam finish up.
Well, that was one of his core arguments for markets. Under particular social and economic conditions, you get different results. But I don't think there's anything general that can be said about this.
I was going to say, because Adam Smith, and I actually did read my Adam Smith, one of the reasons he believed in markets was because he was anti-monopoly, and that he viewed, these concentrations of power as inherently dangerous to liberty. Is that accurate?
That's correct, and he was opposed to mercantilist structures, which have been reconstructed in many ways in modern corporations. Yeah, he was strongly opposed to that. In fact, when the modern corporation was introduced by state power about a century ago, classical liberals, conservatives they were often called, bitterly condemned it as a return to feudalism.
Michael Michalski, Philip Griffin, today we're talking about the difference between liberty and equality. Michael's going to be promoting that liberty should be our focus. Philip is going to be presenting that equality should be our focus. My first question to you guys is, are we talking about equality or equity? Are we talking about trying to all start from the same place? Or are we trying to talk about, as Chomsky was referencing, equality of outcome? Are we trying to say that we want to end up at the same place?
Well, we all end up at the same place. It's 6 feet underground.
Yeah.
It's what happens between now and then is what makes us individuals. And so if our actions and our lives and our outcomes are exactly identical, that's a world I wouldn't want to live in to start off, right? The equality of outcome, I mean, Chomsky says that Adam Smith believed in it, that markets would lead to it. I don't know if markets lead to it. I don't know if it's possible to get the same outcome. Like, take, for example, you take the same recipe and have two different people cook it with exactly the same ingredients, with exactly the same equipment. You will almost never get exactly the same tasting food. And so I think equality of outcome is in theory, at least, it's impossible.
Where do you come in on this one, Phil?
I guess my philosophy would be that we should structure the society in a way that works for the majority of people in it, right? And that's kind of what they did when they got tired of feudalism. They said, this is unfair. You're born into this caste system where, you can't move up in life. If you're a peasant, you're a peasant. If you're a lord, you're a lord. And they overthrew that for capitalism, which promised liberty, equality, fraternity. It promised these things. So that's what they said. Okay, well, let's have a revolution. And so, what I'm thinking is, did capitalism deliver the goods? I'm not kind of keeping track of everyone has to be exactly equal, but I think you look at the outcomes today of the destruction, the social misery of inequality around the world, but also in the richest country on earth, and it doesn't seem moral, doesn't seem ethical, it doesn't seem to be justification for these sorts of policies. So are you saying it's immoral to suffer? I'm saying that the system that we have isn't moral, where the profit motive of the healthcare industry is to find a loophole to kick somebody off of healthcare. So some mom goes bankrupt fighting for the life of their child and doesn't get the cancer treatments that they could have gotten because a corporation needs to make money. And well, not just the corporation, doctors, researchers, people who created the medicine, who deliver and supply the medicine. It's not. See, here's the thing that I would start off right at the bat that I think socialists missed about capitalism. It's you guys have this picture in your mind of like
oh, these evil corporate overlords are stealing all the profits. But there's a whole supply chain of thousands and thousands of people who get a cut. They get a slice of the final price of the product, whatever that product is. I mean, there's nurses, there's people who clean the hospitals, and so on and so on. And I mean, you can make an argument that perhaps the corporate overlords, so to speak, take an unfair cut, but it's the profit margins for most companies are razor thin.
Yeah, I guess I would just disagree with that. I mean, I think these guys are making billions of dollars, and I think we're on the same page as far as subsidies to these guys, right? If I understand correctly. But at the same time, we look at just within our capitalist system and say Europe's, you get different outcomes, or Australia or Canada or, choose your favorite Medicare for all. Well, you get outcomes where everybody's insured. I forgot the statistics, but I think in America, is it one third of people will go bankrupt in their life. Because of
really
medical stuff. I think it's 1 million people a year go bankrupt because of medical emergencies, and something like 40% of people that get diagnosed with some kind of cancer go through their life savings within like a year or two. I mean, essentially, we have this system in America that says, "Hey, you're drowning. Before I save you, give me money."
I think that's an unfair characterization. I mean, have you ever met a doctor who would not save somebody's life? Like, who would first ask? I mean, maybe it happens, but I like to think the better of people. And I know for a fact there are public hospitals in the United States.
Well, it's been a while, but that old Michael Moore documentary where he went around and he showed a clip in front of Congress of the lady whose job it was to work diligently into the wee hours trying to kick people off their insurance, and she said she just couldn't do it anymore. It's not it's not at the doctor level, it's at the insurance level. It says we're not going to cover this treatment, so their hands are kind of tied.
Can I jump in real quick?
You got yeah.
Sorry, was that a bad time to jump in?
Oh no, I was just going to say, and then you get outcomes where people were going to Canada to try and marry a Canuck or whatever that cute little phrase was, where so you could actually marry them to not die, to get your health care.
I want the listener, I feel like they kind of have a feel for you guys, but the topic that we're addressing has so many implications. One of those would be, ever since the Cold War, this disdain, this kind of, uncomfortable silence between capitalism and communism. Here is a survey that pretty much every political science student ends up taking sometime in their college experience. And the goal is not necessarily to get an answer. It's not a test. It's just a survey for the instructor to kind of get a feel for where his class is at. Most instructors won't want to let their class know their political views, because as soon as he says, "Oh, I hate Trump," well, half the room is going to not agree with anything he says. They're not going to learn, right? Or if he says, "Oh, I hate Obama," well, maybe the other half of the room is going to ignore all the points that he's trying to make. While he doesn't want to divulge his own political views, he does want to kind of understand his students' views. So let me throw this out there. If you guys could give me an answer, strongly disagree, somewhat agree, or strongly agree, right? So it's basically you're either, I really disagree with it, or I really agree with it. And then the two in the middle would be like, I kind of disagree, or I kind of agree. All right. So first one here.
There's no neutral option. Like, I have no opinion. There's just 4.
You cannot have no opinion. I think it's designed in that way on purpose, because it's little flippant college students with purple hair, so they just be like, I don't know. That's what my kids tell me. I don't know. Anyway,
okay, all right.
I just want to play Xbox, Dad. Fuck off. If my kid said that to me, I would smash his Xbox over his head. But anyway, that's totally off. Right.
End up on YouTube.
Yeah. Did you see the YouTube one where they were shooting it with the shotgun? Like the redneck mom is like, "I'm going to teach you." This is totally off topic. Let me do my job. All right, here we go. Gentlemen, how much do you agree or disagree with the following statements? From each according to his abilities, to each according to his need.
I strongly disagree.
Okay.
Strongly.
So-
I couldn't disagree more strongly.
No, fair enough.
So wait. So that's what outcomes we should strive for. That's what outcomes we get. What?
There's really no subtext to the question. It's just, do you strongly disagree, somewhat agree, strongly agree with the obvious, very Marxian statement here, from each according to his abilities to each according to his need?
Oh shoot. I'm confused about the question. So strongly agreeing with that would be what? That I strongly agree. What am I agreeing to?
That's what you believe, right? That's what you believe.
That's your worldview, more or less. That's how you think things should be from a maybe not necessarily empirical sense, but a normative sense of the world. That this is how things should be.
Is according to people's needs and abilities.
From each according to his ability to each according to his need. Would you say that if you're to rephrase, if you have more abilities, then you probably have less need? If you have less abilities, you might have more need, that we all need to somehow work together to generate some form of, one might argue, is human rights. Another might argue is a false sense of equality of outcome.
Boy, I feel like I'm being difficult here, but I don't understand.
No, not at all.
It's like, okay, it's like
it's
this,
a
dude.
stupid
It's like,
survey. I'll admit with you right off the bat.
But
it's not
like this.
It's not a deep
so what
survey.
Marx is saying here is if you're starving and I have enough food to feed 2 people, then I'm morally obligated to give you half my food, or at least some of my food, so that you don't starve, because your need is greater than my ability to get food.
Wow,
Yes,
I didn't like how that
agree with
started.
that.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you go strongly agree, and Michael, you go strongly disagree. All right, so I think this is right from the first question. This is a good example of just how much you two differentiate. Second question: a nation will not survive morally or economically when so few have so much, while so many have so little.
I'd strongly agree with that.
I'm going to somewhat disagree.
Okay. A society that puts equality before freedom will get neither. A society that puts freedom before equality will get a high degree of both.
I strongly agree.
I strongly disagree.
All right. Last one in this little track of questions. If any would not work, neither should he eat. If any would not work, neither should he eat. That's from the risen Lord Jesus Christ, just in case you were wondering.
I will strongly agree.
Well, without knowing the context,
you know the context. It's Jesus, Philip.
I'll strongly disagree.
Well, you're going to hell. All right, next question. I didn't know Jesus was such a jerk. Wow.
Yeah,
No,
I thought he was for the poor.
now I'm letting my own personal opinion out. All right, here we go. Next one. Let me know if you're very favorable, somewhat favorable, very unfavorable, somewhat unfavorable. Okay, or you can say you're not sure. We'll let Mike have his middle ground if he needs it. But you haven't taken too much middle ground yet. But anyway, all right, here we go. Next question. Do you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of capitalism?
I have a very favorable opinion of capitalism.
I would say unfavorable.
Somewhat or very?
Very, especially our
Really?
specific how
See,
it's.
now, since I've already kind of, like, my listeners know where I stand. They know I'm pretty socialist for the most part, but I wouldn't say that. I would say that you and I might even disagree there. Like, I'm not,
Yeah.
I don't feel anti-capitalist at all. I think capitalism is very useful. All right, I'm just going to go to the next one. I don't want to start like a personal conversation between me and one of you.
Get into it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, all right. Do you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of socialism?
I will say very unfavorable.
Very favorable, but again, we have to define it. So.
Right. Fair enough. Favorable, unfavorable, communism.
Very unfavorable.
I would say somewhat unfavorable. I don't know.
Okay.
Again, we'd have to define it, but
All right, we're starting to break Phil down a little bit here, Mike.
It's just a survey, too. I haven't even had Adam yet.
Not at all likely, not very likely, somewhat likely, very likely. How likely would you be to vote for a presidential candidate who described him or herself, equal rights, him or herself as the following, a socialist?
Not likely at all.
Very likely.
Also, Robert, you missed the 27 other genders. You can edit that out if you want.
Are you trying to totally destroy the episode? All right, here we go. That's going to be the whole conversation if we let it. Let's see. Fascist. How about if they describe themselves as a fascist? And notice that I said them for non-binary.
No, there you go. Now you're grammatically incorrect, but politically correct.
I don't know that it's grammatically incorrect.
I would say not likely. Not likely. I would not vote for a fascist.
Okay.
Yeah, super not likely.
A capitalist. If they actually said, I am a capitalist.
I would likely vote for them. I'm not going to say very likely, but somewhat likely.
Boy, with these lesser two evils, I guess.
Well, just for the record, this doesn't mean
likely,
that.
Yeah.
Okay, not likely, but just so you know, it doesn't mean that they're the alternative candidate. We're talking about United States, obviously, even though we don't all live in the U.S. But Michael, where do you live?
I'm currently living in Poland. I'm an expat living in Poland.
Okay, cool. And Philip, you're here in the U.S. with me, right?
Yes, same time zone.
All right, cool. We don't need these foreigners like Mr. Mikowski. But
metric system is superior.
Yeah,
it is. Well, I'll give you that. But no, this doesn't mean that the opposing candidate is the opposite of what they're claiming. It just means that this is how they self-identify. A communist. If they self-identified as a communist, where would you guys fall? Not at all likely, not very likely, somewhat likely, very likely.
Not at all likely.
I feel like that's a contradiction because my understanding of communism is a revolutionary socialist, meaning they want to take power through revolution. So it seems kind of, but so I'll say, I don't know, somewhat likely.
Hey, the communists, as far as I know, in Portugal, the Communist Party at least has a partial stake in the government. They have some minority in the ruling coalition. So communists, there exist communist parties, and there are communists who, quote unquote, take power through democratic means.
Yeah, I guess just from a very textbook definition, or at least, the one I've looked at, which might not be, the super correct one, but.
Hey, can I throw a sidewinder in here? This isn't actually part of the college rule exam, but Purdue Owl or whatever. But you know what I mean? How would you guys feel? And this has current relevance with Donald Trump. If a presidential candidate described themselves as a nationalist,
very likely.
Really?
In today's political climate, very likely. Yes.
Really? How about if it was like the 1940s? Would you still be cool with the nationalist?
let's rewind time. I don't know. Maybe not. Probably not. I mean,
okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
But right now, you'd say very likely. Where do you fall there?
In this political climate, yes, I can explain that if you want.
Yes, please.
Well, right now, the way I view politics is it's basically globalism versus nationalism, and I think personally that eventually we will have some kind of global society, and the internet is the driving force behind that. Okay. So one way or another, we're going to get there. The political question is, how are we going to get there? And I believe that globalism is essentially the same force that is behind corporatism, or this return to feudalism that you were referencing earlier, whereby what they want, the corporations or the corporate overlords or whatever, is to have corporate allegiance be more important than national allegiance. I think it's very, very important to preserve individual cultures, individual histories of individual nations and peoples. And I don't want to get into this like NAFTA or the TCPP or whatever, these super global trade deals where basically the working class gets the shaft. And I think, that's essentially where I stand, that nationalism right now is the force for good, whereas globalism is the same as corporatism. And
I have a question. So I think I asked, but are you for corporations, or are you neutral? Do you have a position? I don't think there should be such a thing, such a legal entity as a limited liability corporation. No, I think that's ridiculous. That's what I thought. Yeah, okay.
And Phil, where do you fall on that one? If someone was a self-proclaimed nationalist,
so
what's your likelihood of voting for that guy?
So I don't actually know. I just think of fascist when I think of nationalists, where I don't actually know what policies. It sounds good, like, oh, let's promote our policies. That makes me think of, just like I said, like a fascist kind of dictator.
The same way you would say with the fascists, you said not at all likely. You'd go the same way with someone saying I'm a nationalist.
Right. And maybe, I don't know what the very true sense of the word is, maybe on paper.
I think Michael described it pretty well to say that it has changed over time. Me personally, I'm still creeped by it. It creeps me out, man.
No,
and not because I
mean,
think it's like it's not like that I associate it with white nationalism in particular, like a lot of the liberal media represents whenever Trump said that, but just because I'm still in that very raw post-coital stage from World War II, you know, where I'm just like, don't touch it, you know, it's sensitive. And so when you say nationalist, I think, man, I got two hands I can put around your throat. Like I feel a lot of emotion with that, which probably, you know, being honest, it probably does interrupt my reasoning ability, my rationalization about it. So I don't know.
And to what extent are these dog whistles? These are,
good.
You know, to the base, to the right wing, like, you know, it's code for the things that you're afraid of.
True or false? More people were killed under George W. Bush's presidency than Joseph Stalin's leadership.
False. Well, more people killed by the United States or in the world died?
I think the implication is more
who killed more, Bush or Stalin? I'm going to say false on that.
Yeah, one. But it's basically I get your point. It doesn't really clarify, but who killed more, Bush or Stalin? True or false? Bush
killed more than Stalin.
Stalin. You say false. Where do you fall there, Phil?
You can't give me the numbers, can you? I'd say
it's an opinion,
right?
I mean, obviously there is a true answer, but that's not. Once again, like that's why I say it's a survey to see where people fall.
I don't know how many people either one is killed, but they're both in the millions.
If I gave you the option of true, not sure, or false, would you go with not sure?
Yeah, I would say not sure because they've both definitely killed millions, and then it gets into a tricky question.
I'm still going with false. I'm still going with false.
I'm a little surprised to hear you say that, Phil. That's interesting.
Yeah,
and that doesn't mean that, you know, my opinion's right. I'm just surprised at your answer.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's definitely an empirical number, and then there's one that can be extrapolated from misery and sanctions and stuff like that. But you know, the continuation of those policies in Iraq,
or you know, how about the targeted starvation of millions of Ukrainians?
Okay, well, I was good. Yeah. All right. No, that's cool. It's number 7.
You know,
Fair enough. True or false? People. That's the whole point of the survey, is to provoke a sense of where people stand, and it's supposed to make you a little pissed off, I think. More people were killed under Adolf Hitler's reign than Joseph Stalin's leadership. True or false?
False.
Yeah, Hitler killed more people.
No, Stalin killed more people. I guarantee you that.
Is that true? Yeah. Okay, well, I'm not sure.
It's a survey.
Yeah.
The difference is that the Russians didn't document all their murders, so the numbers are estimated. Whereas the Nazis were very systematic. You know, everybody got a number and so on. So we have a more accurate number from the Nazis. But estimates are between 12 and 20 million, I think, for the Soviets under Stalin.
The numbers, the actual empirical numbers, even with or without documenting, are drastically different.
Yeah.
Drastically different. But I'll let the listener look that up. Over the past 100 years, how many people do you think communism has killed? Less than 1 million, 1 million, 25 million, 50 million, 75 million, or 100 million or more. Just so you get those numbers again, they're all millions, so it's like 1, 25, 50, 75, or 100 plus. What do you think communism has killed?
I'm going to say 100 plus. Over the last 100 years, I'm going to say 100 plus.
Boy, and then of course, you know, we can argue whether it's actually communism or it's, you know, a totalitarianism that's co-opted the word for political reasons. But for the purposes of this question, yeah, I'll say 50 million? I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
25 or 50, yeah.
So Michael says over 100, and you're saying half that, maybe even less than half that. That's interesting. All right,
yeah,
so
I just haven't looked at these numbers.
I think what would be interesting to the listener is is Googleable a word? I don't know if that's a word, but this is all Googleable stuff.
Google tracks you.
And it doesn't mean that even Google's going to get it necessarily accurate. There's different sources of media.
Algorithms, yeah.
Yeah, we've all learned that one within, you know, the last decade, I guess, that the internet's not necessarily always helpful. But this is something that people can look up. But I think it's interesting to see how you guys differ drastically, even on stuff that, with the best information system we have available to us, there are facts about this. I can honestly say that I had to look up the facts myself because I had to just recently take the survey for a political science class, and then afterwards I had to look up the facts, and I was surprised at how much in error I was myself. And both of you had some, at least from what my studies showed, both of you made some mistakes there, but the point of the survey isn't, once again, this is at least the way that my professor describes it.
It's just to show how you think.
Right,
right. I'm going to say about communism, for sure, like if I were to bet money, I would say it's over 50 million, but 100 million, I would say that would be a fair guess as well.
Fair enough.
But for sure, like factually, for sure, more than 50 million. I'd bet money on that.
I'd kind of like to get into kind of the philosophy of kind of what I think the systems are: socialism, communism, capitalism.
Yeah.
The outcomes of that, and then kind of Michael's take on how he thinks our specific form of capitalism would do better under libertarian philosophies. Because I actually don't even understand the word libertarian. And like, if you said he's libertarian, I have no idea what that means.
It's meant a lot of different things at different times with Nozick and all that.
It means I believe that you should be able to buy and sell people.
Holy shit.
Well, no, I don't believe that. I don't believe
all right.
that. Yeah.
You got me on that one. All right. But hey, before we go down terms.
I just want to make sure we get to that stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely. Because we don't want to do semantics, and that's really easy to do whenever we're like, are you a socialist? Are you a libertarian? But I really want to peg on this whole thing. Like, which one's more important, equality or liberty, and why?
And so I would say kind of a Chomsky-ish answer that with more equality, you get more liberty. Because what kind of liberty do we have right now where we have this wage slavery, where we rent ourselves to people? And I'm sure Michael would say, well, you have a choice where you're going to work at. But who has a choice in like a low-income neighborhood, born into a broken family, going to a school that's about to be unaccredited, and a drug war zone with different policing practices and a different justice system, et cetera, and with redlining of districts to create ghettos and different policies on if your name sounds black, they don't hire you on an application. All these things working against you. What choice does somebody like that have in our specific capitalist system? And maybe he would say, well, I would fix the capitalist system a different way. But just using our current model, I mean, does that person have liberty of freedom of life choices? Or can we look at surveys and look at studies that show that we don't have social mobility? We have the worst social mobility of any industrialized nation, and outcomes are largely determined by what you're born into, your class, your race, your background, your family's wealth. And so you're kind of stuck a lot of times. And that doesn't mean that you can point to one person and say, you can't make it, you can't be a millionaire or be successful. Of course you can't. But the deck's stacked against you, and it's systemic. We have a broken system.
It all depends on how you want to define liberty. And if you're defining liberty from the Marxist perspective, the materialistic perspective, where if I don't have the material means to do something, that means I'm not free to do it, then okay, yeah, that makes sense. But that's a very idealistic definition of liberty. I define liberty as the opposite, that the primary and the first place where you have liberty is in your mind, in your ability to think. And the other side of the coin of liberty is responsibility. The one does not exist without the other. So you cannot be free if you are at the same time unable to accept the consequences of your actions. Where do I stand on people who have the deck stacked against them? Well, yeah, of course, every person is going to have a different road in life, a different path. But if you have everything given to you from the outset, then you lose the value of life, the value in the struggle of overcoming whatever odds that were placed against you. And to say that, oh, well, it's impossible because it's systemic, I would say that's just self-defeating. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where you say, oh, it's systemic, it's impossible, I can't do it. So then you never really try. And then you turn around and say, oh, see, I didn't succeed. It's because of the system. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like when you say that, it makes me think of like Bill Gates saying, well, I'm not going to give my kids more than, a couple million because I don't want them to just be lazy in life. But I guess what I'm talking about, let me find, I was listening to Nader and he talked about what freedom means. And, do we really have freedom? And he defines it as personal freedom versus like a civic freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, or he quotes Marcus Cicero, who defined freedom as participation in power. And he says, freedom isn't this personal freedom where you can pick your friends, what to eat, what music to listen to, what you're going to do in life, clothes to wear, etc. He mentions that, you can do all this in oppressive dictatorships, right? He says freedom is
not
actually
necessarily, but okay.
Well,
sorry. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh no, sure. But in China, whatever. But he says freedom is actually being able to participate in decisions that affect you. And he quotes again, this Roman adage that says, "Whatever touches all shall be decided by all." And he also says, asterisk, this doesn't have to be direct democracy. But I would say that definition of freedom we don't have in America. The studies show that we have a plutocracy where public policy, decisions about what goes on in life are controlled by concentrations of power and wealth, multinational corporations, etc. They make the decisions on how life goes. And Adam Smith called these guys the masters of mankind. He said in his day it was the merchants and somebody else. But, in our day, it's the people that own the society are these financial institutions and the 1%. They sometimes literally write laws with their lawyers and lobbyists. And so you take
sometimes,
surveys,
most of the time.
Well, yeah. But take ALEC or whatever that goes into state legislatures and stuff. But so that's not liberty, that's not freedom. And I guess my like out for you would say, well, maybe he says, okay, yes. Well, because that's what I wanted to ask you. Under our current system, do we have what you're looking for capitalists and all these ideals? Or would you say, well, because I know a lot of libertarians say, well, state intervention has kind of given us this system. And I would argue the opposite. I would say, well, this is what it's always going to devolve into, and actually deregulating and taking away worker protections would make the system worse. But yeah, kind of what are your thoughts on what I said about Nader's freedom, personal versus civic, and kind of how do you feel with the outcomes of capitalism? Okay,
so basically, to start off with, the dichotomy between civic freedom and personal freedom, or civic liberty and personal liberty, is I think it goes back to Hobbes's social contract theory. And so the idea is, if you're going to live in a society, you always have to limit yourself to some degree. You cannot just do whatever you feel like, because it might disturb other people. And that's the nature of the social contract. And that's always the question, is how much of my personal liberty am I willing to give up for the sake of a functional society? Now, so it's a given. You have to give up some of it. You have to give up a lot of it. You can't just, fulfill your base instinct just because you have like a desire, like I want Rob's shit, so I'm just going to take it. No, that's not how it works. Now, as to your other point about participating in power, and your criticism is you're saying we don't have, I'm guessing, enough of participation in power. And power means you get to participate in decisions that affect you. That's also part, I think, of the social contract, where there are so many people within society making decisions that you have absolutely no idea about. It's impossible for everybody to participate in every single decision. And that is the ultimate advantage of a capitalist society, where it's, in theory at least, supposed to be decentralized. So there's a whole supply chain, and in that supply chain, millions and millions of people are making individual decisions. And out of those individual decisions comes this aggregate that we call the market, which doesn't really exist in practice. It's just an abstraction we use to represent the activity of the entire society. And so I would disagree with the idea that you cannot participate in decisions that affect you. Yes, you can. You do that by participating in the market and generating value for other people. You do something productive. And when you do something productive, you get rewarded. And that reward is essentially the productivity of other people. And that's kind of like the deal. The libertarian position is that the more you have a third-party government, and the total anarchist position, which I said earlier I've grown out of, would be that, there should be no government at all. But we're not at that state yet, is what I would say. Eventually, I don't think there will be a government, and eventually these problems that you're talking about will be solved. Right now, so some of the things that are being produced by the society are siphoned off to this, in theory, referee of the game, let's call it. And so your criticism is a perfectly valid one, is that the referee has become corrupt because now he's refereeing the game that favors some individual over others, and not by merit, but because of influence, right? Because the referee is starting to profit because these individuals are giving him a cut. So it's kind of like a referee in a sports game that is getting paid off by the mafia because the mafia fixed the game. And that's the situation we find ourselves in on the general, in like the grand scheme of things. But that doesn't mean that you can't make decisions in your life. That doesn't mean you are powerless. You are exceptionally powerful, especially with the new technology of the internet, where the more you produce value, create value, and in every sense of the word, not just material economic value, but also emotional value, spiritual value, creative value of all kinds, the more people will recognize you. And now like we're speaking on this podcast, you can use a simple computer to magnify your behavior, and then other people model that behavior. And over time, that changes the society. It's totally possible, especially in this day and age, to change the society from the bottom up. I don't think the powers that be are as relevant as they were, for sure. And they're certainly losing their power is what my perspective is right now.
Well, so let me ask you a couple. So you would say we have civic freedom. We can participate in decisions because my textbook definition of democracy is, to what extent do people have a meaningful way of developing, articulating their own ideas, putting them forward in the political arena, and then controlling those decisions? Because I would say we can't do that. I would say we have this plutocracy where the decisions are made at the top, and studies show that. So, I mean, do you think we have civic freedom, this personal freedom to do that, or do you think we have a plutocracy?
In terms of, you're talking about the government power?
A meaningful way.
I would say it certainly leans to the plutocracy, sure.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, so then my next question would be, okay, so the system we currently have we don't have civic freedom to be able to press for these things, for ending all this military expenditure and bailing out the banks, and all this stuff happens that the public doesn't want. And that's because the public doesn't have civic freedom. They can't affect public policy. We can choose what computer to buy and to go on a podcast, personal freedom. But we can't make decisions about our government, because I would say our capitalist system has put, and will always put, a few people at the top in control of all these things.
Well, here's the thing you have to understand is government is antithetical to capitalism. Government is what capitalism accepts so that it's not, you don't get stabbed in the back, essentially. It's kind of like government, in essence, does not reward merit in the same way that the market does. So don't say that, like, oh, it's a capitalist system, and so this oligarchy is controlling the government. Okay, that they're controlling the government, but if as soon as a corrupt oligarchy takes control of a company, that company, without the assistance of the government, tends to go bankrupt or lose money.
Well, and I think we do agree on government intervention, and that is what we have to a large degree. I would just say that we would still get these outcomes. So the government wouldn't bail out GM for $50 billion. Maybe GM would go under, but you would still end up with some sort of GM at the top who would make decisions based on profit over people. And what we have.
Well, see, here's the thing: the profit is the people. Okay, because if I'm profiting, that means I'm giving you something that you want. That means I'm improving your life, and in exchange for that, you're giving me some money, and you got that money by improving the life of somebody else.
Well, what I'm talking about is the difference between socialism and capitalism in this sense, right? So under one system, capitalism, you go into a town, and the people that make decisions about that factory are the board members, the 1%, right? And
the owners of the factory, right?
Whoever owns the most shares gets to vote who's on the board, and they make decisions about what to do with the profits and what to make and how to distribute and so on, right? So they make decisions not based on the well-being of the people that run the factory, the town, any of that. They make it on profits. It's all about profits. And there's a good argument that says legally they have an obligation to do this, right? So they'll close a factory like GM just did. They'll close these factories because what they want to do is suppress labor and maximize profits. And they do that by automation. They do that by hiring cheap labor, women, immigrants, whatever they can do, right? They need to make profits go up. So they'll do it. It doesn't matter how much they pollute, destroy the environment, the whole world does not matter. All that matters is that quarterly profit. And then the other system is where you have socialism. You have worker control over the factory, right? And they make decisions based on the good of society. So if you go to those guys in that scenario and say, hey, should we move this factory and lose your job? And then your local government loses out on the tax revenue to fund hospitals and schools. Should we do that? They're going to say, well, heck no. Should we give an exorbitant amount of millions and millions of dollars to these guys at the top that they won't even know what to do with this amount of money. Meanwhile, you'll have to borrow money to send your kid to college or go bankrupt because they got leukemia. Of course, you're not going to say that. So you get two different outcomes with those different systems because capitalism needs to keep making money. And they've already outsourced all the jobs and financialized the economy in the United States. So now they're going into other markets in China and all these guys making Apple computers. And pretty soon, they're going to run out of third worlds to exploit because those people don't make enough money to buy the products. I've kind of gone on.
And then what? And then what? Armageddon? See, here's the thing. I think the view you're presenting is very dichotomous and overly simplified because it's not just that the board of directors has to worry about profits. They also have to worry about a little thing called marketing and their image and who they're selling their product to. What are they producing, right? They also have to pay the workers enough to survive, or they have to pay the workers enough so that they want to work in that job. There are market forces. There's something called the labor market that balances out. Like, of course, they're going to try to quote unquote suppress labor, but what they're trying to do is find the cheapest labor possible.
Right.
So, for example, right now I'm working closely with a medium-sized factory, and their number one problem right now is finding labor. Their wages, no. Their wages are higher than almost anything, like any entry level position you could get here, and they're still having trouble finding reliable labor. Right now in where I'm at in Poland, the labor market is depleted because everybody went to the West. Why did they go to the West? Well, because there's higher wages there, and because globalism created this monstrosity called the European Union, and so now people from my country are forced to go west. Whereas the people in those countries, they see Polish people as like invaders who are trying to take their jobs. The board of directors has a lot more to consider than just, we're going to suppress this labor and we're going to make millions of dollars. They have to negotiate all along the supply chain. And here's the key point. They have to worry about marketing and PR, because if the public image of the company goes sour, then they could kiss all those profits goodbye.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for the conversation today. If you don't mind, just make a closing argument, and then I would like to throw some Rawls at you. I want to talk about the veil of ignorance just before we finish up. But Phil, if you don't mind making a closing point that you would say might encapsulate the main momentum of your conversation. And then, Michael, if you don't mind following up after that. And then I got a question for you guys that I think the listener would really like a response to.
Right. Okay. So I would just say capitalism has given us an unjust, undemocratic system that we're supposed to gain wealth, forget all but self. We've got these huge, unaccountable private tyrannies that control the economy, the political system, social and cultural life. And we're always going to get that power structure that makes decisions with like a capitalist system. And the outcomes that we get, we've got some equality statistics where 40% of Americans have $0 after all their debts and assets are added up. You know, something like 40% of people can't make it through a $400 emergency. So, I mean, and when we look at all the statistics, we can see that half the people in the United States are poor or near poor. So the system isn't working. All the new wealth generated goes to the top 1%. So we have a system that's morally and ethically unjustifiable. that's created this plutocracy. And we haven't been given what capitalism promised, which is liberty, equality, and fraternity.
Okay. Well, to finish up, I would just like to say, without going into deep to what you just said, just leave what you said. It's your closing statement. But I would say you have power. You have more power than you know. And the power you have rests in what you do with the liberty that you do have. You can spend all day criticizing it, saying, oh, it's limited. Oh, these other people are keeping me enslaved. I'm a wage slave. Or you can take the liberty that you have, work within it as much as you possibly can, and work to expand it. And I believe that's the way life works. It's all on you. It's your personal responsibility. If you're looking to change society, don't look to somebody else to do it for you. You do it. You be the example. So if you're working a shit job, work the best that you possibly can. Be the happiest that you possibly can, the friendliest, and help your coworkers, help whoever you're interacting with. And by doing so, you will build up something that is called social capital. And that will allow you to create a momentum to overcome any economic or social disadvantage you may perceive yourself to have right now. Real liberty is in what you think, what you believe, because that ultimately influences how you act. And how you act branches out into the greater world. Other people see it, they model it, and by behaving this way, you can change the world. Most of all, be thankful for what you have. If you think capitalism has not delivered on its promises, well, at least it's delivered on technological advancement, antibiotics, longer lifespans, electricity, running water, and so on. Be thankful for what you have, even if it's very little, and do your best to overcome the challenges that you face.
Guys, thanks so much for everything. This has been fantastic. That's why I just shut up, because after our survey, I was like, these guys could just kind of do this show on their own. I'm not necessarily needed here, but I really
we definitely need a part 2, because I feel like,
yeah, we should do would you guys both be open to doing a follow-up to this?
Of course.
That would be a lot of fun. Okay, so I feel like one of the major contentions throughout your conversation was the difference between how things are and how things should be. I don't think you guys necessarily, even though you're so polarized, so different, but I don't think you guys disagree about how things should be. You both want liberty. You both want equality. You just feel like we have to take different paths to get there. I wonder if maybe John Rawls solves this dilemma, and it's not reality. It's conceptual. Here he presents the veil of ignorance. It's a method of determining the morality of political issues proposed in 1971 by American philosopher John Rawls in his original position, that's in quotes, original position, political philosophy. It's based on the following thought experiment. People making political decisions imagine that they know nothing about the particular talents, abilities, tastes, social class, and position they will have within a social order. If that's a little bit confusing to the listener, I know you guys are familiar with this, but Spencer J. Maxey, if you don't know his name, you should, outlines the concept as follows. Imagine that you have set for yourself the task of developing a totally new social contract for today's society. How could you do it so fairly? Although you could never actually eliminate all of your personal biases and prejudices, you would need to take steps, at least to minimize them. Rawls suggests that you imagine yourself in an original position behind a veil of ignorance. Behind this veil, you know nothing of yourself and your natural abilities or your position in society. You know nothing of your sex, race, nationality, or individual tastes. Behind such a veil of ignorance, all individuals are simply specified as rational, free, and moral equal beings. You do know that in the real world, however, there will be a wide variety in the natural distribution of natural assets and abilities, and that there will be differences of sex, race, and culture that will distinguish groups of people from one another. So basically, Rawls is presenting a conceptual, hypothetical scenario where we might be able to meet the goals of liberty and equality based on ignoring all of our biases. And I feel like you kind of want to get to the same place. You're just arguing about the journey to get there. One of you is saying, hey, let's go down this path that others have made for us. The other might be saying, let's take the road less traveled. Would you at least agree that maybe even though it's not pragmatic, John Rawls comes up with an idea that you would both agree on, that you would say, at least ethically, maybe not practically, but ethically, whether we want more equality or more liberty, this could get us to the same goal. Slavery, right? Would you create a world of slavery if you knew you might be a slave? Well, obviously not, right? Neither of you would do that, even if slavery might align with your political philosophy, which I know it doesn't align with either of yours, but you know what I mean?
Well,
Like,
well,
that's
so
just,
the question though, the question was, what system would you create in this scenario? Was that the question?
the question is, would you say that this veil of ignorance is a hypothetical scenario where you guys might be able to find common ground, and you would say, at least ethically, behind the veil of ignorance, you're not so different?
I mean, I think you summarized it correctly, saying that we just have a different strategy on how to get, equality and liberty and these things. And maybe we disagree on, if we have it currently.
Right.
And so I don't know. I think we would definitely agree that we want the same things, like you said, through a different vehicle. I think socialism, worker control of, collective ownership of the society, is a better route than the current capitalist system we have. So I don't know how much I don't think we would really agree on anything, behind the veil. I don't know. What do you think, Michael?
You don't think you guys would agree behind the veil? Mike, would you agree with Philip behind the veil?
Probably. Because behind the veil, what you're talking about is, well, what outcome do you want? And I think you hit the point exactly, Robert. I think the vast majority of people, except for like a minority of psychopaths or whatever, but the vast majority of people, what you want is to love and to be loved, to use a cliche. But you want a world where everybody can achieve some type of happiness, fulfillment, and flourishing. The question is, what does that entail, and how do we get there?
Guys, thanks so much. I really enjoyed this, and I was surprised at your answers about the veil of ignorance. I thought you would both agree to common ground there. It's interesting. One agreed, one didn't. Mike, Philip, what's the last thing you want to say here before we let you go?
I hope people look at the planners of society, starting with the constitutional debates, and check out some books such as Manufacturing Consent and documents like the Powell Memorandum.
The thing I would plug is you yourself, the listener. That's the thing I try to share with people as much as I possibly can. Is your life has value and it has meaning, and the only way that it can't is if you believe that it doesn't.
She would always laugh and say, "Remember when we used to play bang bang?" And she shot me down.
Thank you to Mike and Phil. Thank you to Dave Blair at davefreesong.com/free music. Thank you to our patrons. You too can support us at patreon.com/right and learn more at therighttoreason.com. Next week, I'll be debating ethics with a Catholic philosophy professor. In the light of all the Catholic priest pedophilia, you know it's going to get awkward and unsettling. Prepare yourselves. Between now and then, remember that you have the right to reason.
It's a rare condition this day and age to read any good news on the newspaper page.
This could get us to the same goal.
So I apologize. So I missed his.
Was that horrible? I thought that was an awesome setup. Are you kidding me?
You did a really good job.
Did it sound good?
And the only way that it can't is if you believe that it doesn't.
Mike really went for the gold there. This corny ass motherfucker. That's just like that was a really great combo, and I look forward to talking to you guys again.
Yeah, great.
Thanks.
Yeah, it was a good
thanks
time.
a lot, Robert. Yeah, thanks a lot. It was a great opportunity. A pleasure to be here.